Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to begin. Dr. Pansy Hamilton and Mrs. Maria Jones, members of the Board of Directors of the Mico University College. Dr. Asburn Pinnock, President of the Mico University College. Ambassador Byron Blake. Dr. Eduardo Ali, Pro-Registrar of the CXC. Professor Clinton Hutton, Director of the Institute of Technological and Educational Research at the Mico. Professor Rupert Lewis, Dr. Maziki Thame, Ms. Audrey Sadler, Deputy Librarian at the University of the West Indies, Mona, Ms. Winsome Hudson, CEO of the National Library of Jamaica, Ms. Dorothy White, representing the Marcus Garvey in School Foundation, Mr. Stephen Golding of the UNIA, Dr. Mark Smith, President of the Jamaica Teachers Association, other specially invited guests to this function, senior administrators, staff, and students of the Mico University College, ladies and gentlemen all, good afternoon, and welcome to the official launch of the Mico Publishers and its first publication, Marcus Garvey, Pedagogy and the Power of Education. This event marks a milestone in the colorful history and rich legacy of the Mico. This is an institution founded in part out of the generosity of Lady Jane Mico, who was fortunate to inherit great wealth from Samuel Mico, an outstanding philanthropist. The institution is a legacy of the work of Sir Thomas Fowell Buxton, member of the British Parliament and anti-slavery campaigner. Established to advance the education of the children of the former enslaved people, the Mico has grown leaps and bounds over its almost 190 years history. The Mico is steeped in tradition, oral tradition, but has embraced all advancements in communications technology over the years. The Mico Publishers will be the new channel through which education for development and personal empowerment will take place. A vision of the late Professor Edwin Jones has been realized through the instrumentality of Professor Clinton Hutton and the staff at ITA. I now invite President of the Mico University College, Dr. Asburn Pinnock, to present the vision of the Mico Publishers. And while Dr. Pinnock makes his way to the podium, I'm to advise that this event is being recorded. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I stand on the protocol that was already established. In the interest of time, good afternoon, distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, students, scholars, and friends of the Mico. Today, we are filled with great pride and a profound sense of purpose, because this is yet another historic occasion at the Mico. We are surrounded by some of the most innovative persons and our region's best minds. And we are launching our own publishing house, the Mico Publishers, along with our first publication, as Mr. Sewell just posited, Marcus Garvey, Pedagogy and Power of Education. And this promises to be a repository of authentic Caribbean knowledge and history. On that note of history, for 189 years, almost 190 years, the Mico has stood as a beacon of educational excellence in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean. Today we are taking that legacy one bold step further. Miconians, we are ready to move in a direction that every successful society must go, and is from being consumers of knowledge to creating it, from importing narratives that are sometimes foreign to us to authoring our own. The Mico Publishers is dedicated to providing high-quality materials for the tertiary education, the training institutions, candidates preparing for Caribbean Examination Council, CXC, CXC examinations, and generally texts germane to the broad cultural and intellectual development of sectors of our own education demography. The Mico Publishers is but another crucial step in Mico's 21st century journey, which began with the establishment of the Institute of Technological and Educational Research, ITA, under the leadership of one of Mico's illustrious sons, Professor Edwin Jones. It was during this time that the Mico Journal of Education was founded, and this academic journal is now growing in strength and importance. Now, Professor Jones is not here, but I'm going to ask Mrs. Jones to stand as a representative of Professor Jones. Please stand and take the credit. Thank you for being here, Mrs. Jones. The baton has been passed on to another illustrious son of the Mico, Professor Clinton Hutton, the powerhouse behind the press and the publication. Prof. Hutton, could you stand, please? Oh, is already standing? Ladies and gentlemen, we also pause to recognize the worth and work of Mrs. Sandra Gray Alvaranga, the rock and foundation of ITA, supporting Professor Jones in his time, and now Professor Hutton. Mrs. Alvaranga, we thank you so much for the work that you do every day. Ladies and gentlemen, today as Jamaicans, we are making another step from being shaped by the world to shaping it ourselves. The truth is that for too long, Caribbean educators and students have relied on academic texts and theories authored by people who have never lived our realities. While this external scholarship is valuable, it often reflects perspectives and priorities that is not our own. In many of these texts, our concerns and personal effects of our history and culture are not at the center. We are often instead the footnotes, the margins, and sometimes just the other. But fellow Jamaicans, you and I know we are not a marginal people. We are a people of thinkers. We are leaders. We are visionaries. We have developed our own political thought, our histories, our own intellectual tradition. And so the Mico is ready to guide, prepare, and to amplify the scientific recording of our people's knowledge. We must take up the pen, not just to teach, but to tell, not just to study, but to define. The Mico Publishers was born from this understanding, that to truly educate our people, the material they use to learn must be grounded in the Caribbean experience and shaped by our own voices and relevant to our context. This is why it is so fitting that our inaugural publication is Marcus Garvey, Pedagogy and the Power of Education. Being one of the book's editors myself, I can tell you that the publication will bring fresh insight into the legacy of one of Jamaica's most powerful thinkers and global icons. Marcus Garvey understood that education is not neutral. It was transformative, liberating, and revolutionary. Allow me to thank Professor Clinton Hutton, already standing, Dr. Maziki Thame, could you stand please and be recognized? Professor Vereen Shepherd, I don't think she's here yet. Professor Rupert Lewis, Dr. Julius Garvey is online. So could you give them a hand, please? We have not just written a book. We have opened another door for the descendants of former slaves, and that the Mico exists to educate. The first door enables more Jamaicans from all walks of life to become teachers. And today's door will enable those educators to become scholars and crafting of new knowledge. And now that the door is open, we at the Mico intend to walk through it with purpose. As the institution with the largest collection of chief examiners and exam markers in the region, we know where the gaps are, and we understand the curriculum, and therefore we understand what is missing. And now, through this publishing house, we'll begin to fill those gaps thoughtfully, rigorously, and authentically. We are proud to already work closely with the Ministry of Education. And now we can go even further, not just as a partner in policy or teacher training, but as a provider of academic content that centers the Jamaican and the Caribbean story. We will publish research that honors and amplifies the work of regional scholars like Professor Errol Miller, Professor Vereen Shepherd, and the many unsung academics doing meaningful work in our schools and our communities all across the region. Let this moment mark the beginning of a new chapter, not just for the Mico, but for the future of Caribbean scholarship. Let us start looking to ourselves for academic resources and those resources that we need. Let us tell our stories, teach our theories, and build a body of work that reflects who we are and who we aspire to be. I invite us all, educators, students, authors, policymakers, and literary enthusiasts, to support the Mico publishers. Submit your work, read our books, and share our vision. Together, we will shape the intellectual landscape where the Caribbean is no longer peripheral, but central. Thank you, and let us start publishing. Let the publishing begin. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pinnock, for establishing that compelling vision. And it's just for us as members of the community to commit ourselves to the realization. I wish, ladies and gentlemen, to place on record apologies from Senator Dr. the Honorable Dana Morris Dixon, Minister of Education, Skills, Youth, and Information, as well as Reverend Professor Veron Satchel, Pro-Chancellor and Chairman of the Board of Directors. I would also like to welcome Dr. Julius Garvey and other persons who are joining us online. One of our key partners, as alluded to by President, is the Caribbean Examinations Council. And today we are pleased to have with us the Pro-Registrar, Dr. Eduardo Ali, and he will now bring a message.
Good afternoon, all. I know the protocols have already been established, but please permit me to salute a few persons who are in this audience. And let me start, first of all, by saluting you, Dr. Asburn Pinnock, President of the Mico University College. And as was indicated, we are not just a partner of the Mico University College, but you are a friend of the Caribbean Examinations Council. And we indeed have the opportunity to, and the privilege to be with you today to share in this very important occasion. So to you, sir, distinguished academics, members of the board of directors, members of faculty, and the wider Mico community. To the editors, to you, sir, again, who have taken the time to produce the seminal works, Marcus Garvey, The Pedagogy and Power of Education, along with Professor Clinton Hutton, who I presume is somewhere in the audience. Oh, he's there, right? We want to say congratulations to both of you and to all the esteemed authors who have put together this piece of work that I am just waiting to read. I'm hoping that after today I'll have that opportunity, and for many reasons. If you understand my background, I look at post-colonial education within an education policy context, so you would imagine this would be of interest to me. So I'm pleased to represent our Registrar and Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Wayne Wesley, who has asked me to convey his congratulations to you. Dr. Wesley is on well-deserved rest and leave, and so I'm deputizing for him in all aspects, and so I'm very honored to be here with you to be able to do that today. In applauding this significant effort, in creating another useful publishing outlet for scholarly work, as we've heard today. Dr. Wesley himself has pointed out how particularly gratifying it is that this first publication on the philosophies of Garvey was selected to bring focus to the power of education. And I see a scholar in his own right just arrived, who I have a lot of esteem for, Professor Miller. Salute you, sir. Indeed, the provision of high-quality content for the preparation of our Caribbean people through a structured, relevant teaching, learning, and assessment system that will be validated by the content that is published, not just in this text, but in all the texts that will arise, whether they are articles or they're further books. We certainly look forward because those will contribute to the Caribbeanness that we seek in our content, but more importantly, the transformative pedagogies that are needed for informing what we do in our school systems, and certainly in all aspects of our endeavors in education. And so for us at CXC, it gives us an opportunity to be able to work with this content that is produced to strive for better human capital development of our peoples of the region. And so in developing our human capital, we believe that the expansive knowledge shared in our thinking, even as Garvey has, a global man ahead of his time, who has been pulled by a vision, the transformative vision, of what the end state would look like way before he actually survived to see it, certainly is now ours to fulfill in these times. And so at CXC, we have been looking at what's been happening globally, and we are indeed in a position where we have been strategically repositioning to think about what the society needs by the year 2050. In fact, we've already articulated a vision for 2050, and we'll be looking at what assessment systems and pedagogical systems would look like, and the need for using technologies in education, but also understanding the value of Caribbeanness in that regard. And so as I think about this particular text, I reflect on a very seminal text that was established in as far as 1968 by none other than Paulo Freire, whose Pedagogy of the Oppressed explored the opportunities for liberation of human consciousness and the critical consciousness of masses, looking at adaptive philosophies of education that would embrace the power of education through praxis and the communities of change for which we all seek. And I believe this text will provide the foundation for much of this, which we're looking forward to. And even as the publishers, Mico publishers, would be launched and would engage in producing other works, we believe that the seminal work, as was articulated by the vision just shared, provides for an opportunity for Caribbean identity, appreciating our indigenous capacities of the region, of our peoples who have come from a diverse range of cultural contexts, historical legacies, and antecedents, that allows us to celebrate our unique heritage, our uniqueness as a Caribbean civilization, and providing an opportunity for us to value our post-colonial heritage through ideal research, publications that focus on decolonizing methodologies and pedagogies, ladies and gentlemen. So for us at CXC, this is very important. And for you as educators, I know we are all seized with the imperative of fulfilling our collective duty of care for the minds we mold and for the characters we will shape during the education that we provide and the learning processes that we embrace. Certainly, CXC, working as an assessment body and an awarding body in the region, and has collaborated not just with Mico University, but all others in the region that we've worked with. We look forward to these scholarly works because we believe, as was indicated, this provides the tools for us to unlock the potential of our Caribbean people, to ensure that what is produced in our curricula in the region, and certainly in the syllabuses that CXC has, would provide the mechanism by which we would embrace critical consciousness of what the society needs, and looking not just at the past, but looking to the future that we're trying to build. So as we think about the kinds of skills and competencies our citizens need, that we need to assess, we will be in a position to better shape what the society needs as we progress in that particular trajectory. And so ladies and gentlemen, as I close, I'd just say that if Garvey were alive today, addressing us in this very room, I'm almost certain we would be inspired. We would be inspired because of his compelling vision for what he sees in a post-colonial modern context. And so we, as people who represent what is needed for society today, must therefore embrace this vision, this compelling vision, as he would have embraced it. And certainly the vision for the publishing firm, company, or for publishing entity that is being established. GARVEY would no doubt tell us that our destiny as a people is for advancing human capital development. The launch that we have today certainly signifies and dignifies this approach. And so, ladies and gentlemen, CXC salutes all of you for this accomplishment. And I would dare say that while we have an existing partnership with Mico University College, there seems to be others that will be emerging, and more will be said on that later on. And we will continue in that endeavor to work with you to build what the region needs for the times ahead. And we want to thank you all. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. God bless you. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ali, and we continue as partners in this thrust for development. I wish to join Dr. Ali in extending special welcome to Professor Errol Miller, and particularly, Professor, in your capacity as a former Chancellor of the Mico University College. We now move to a ribbon cutting exercise, and I will be assisted by Mrs. Alvaranga. I invite Dr. Pinnock, Dr. Pansy Hamilton, Mrs. Maria Jones, Professor Hutton. Is he Professor Clinton Hutton? Yes. To join us for the ribbon cutting, signifying the official start, or official opening of the Mico Publishers. So I think on, yes. To articulate, is the modern version of the ribbon cutting. Thank you very much. All the photographs have been taken, notwithstanding that Professor Hutton was amongst the persons here. He's our official photographer. We now turn our attention to the launch of the book. It is quite fitting that the first book from the Mico Publishers is on pedagogy, the art and science of teaching. But even more significant is that this pedagogy is based on the philosophy, teaching, and lifestyle of our own Marcus Garvey, a leading advocate for true empowerment within the African diaspora. Today we celebrate Garvey as a sovereign learner, as characterized by one of the authors. We also celebrate the tradition of self-directed learning, rooted in ancestral history, as evidenced by the authentic representation of early civilization. I now introduce to you briefly the distinguished authors of this great work. Dr. Julius Garvey is online, is son of Jamaica's first national hero, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and renowned Pan-African and feminist activist and author, Amy Garvey. Dr. Garvey is also a Pan-African scholar, educator, and activist. May we give Dr. Garvey a round of applause. Professor Clinton Hutton is the director of the Institute of Technological and Educational Research at the Mico University College. He is a retired professor of Caribbean political philosophy, culture and aesthetics at the University of the West Indies, and a distinguished fellow at the P.J. Patterson Institute for Africa-Caribbean Advocacy. Dr. Rupert Lewis is Emeritus Professor of Political Thought in the Department of Government at the University of the West Indies. He's a renowned scholar of the GARVEY movement and Caribbean radicalism. And as someone who grew up in a particular era, I can relate to that. I've read your work in many forms. Dr. Asburn Pinnock is an educational leader with over 35 years of distinguished service in the education sector. He's currently president of the Mico University College, the region's oldest and most distinguished teacher training institution. He's a staunch advocate of STEAM and a member of the Jamaica STEM for Growth Foundation. Perhaps I took it for granted that we know, I probably erred, so let me just go back to ensure. Dr. Lewis, will you please stand? Yes, yeah, good. Professor Hutton, I'm taking it for granted. Dr. Pinnock, certainly, yes, all right. Dr. Maziki Thames, a senior lecturer in the Department of Government at the University of the West Indies, Mona. She has worked in the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute for Social and Economic Studies at UWI and the Clark Atlanta University in Georgia. Her research and writing focus on post-colonial blackness and intersections of class and gender in political life. Doctor, please stand. Yeah. On her way is Dr. Vereen Shepherd, Professor Emerita of History and Gender Studies at the University of the West Indies. She served as University Director for Gender and Development Studies and in UA's Center for Reparation Research. Her research and writing focus on the Jamaican economic history during slavery, migration, the diaspora, and reparation. Let us acknowledge Professor. At this time, I invite one of the editors of the book, Professor Clinton Hutton, to give the editor's remarks. Welcome, Clinton, Doctor.
Mr. Chairman, brothers and sisters, greetings. This book, the first of the Mico publishers, came as a result of the selection of some presentations done in 2020. Virtual conference on Marcus Garvey and the power of education and the education of the African child. The articles that we have selected and then worked upon were done by the persons whose names were called. Garvey stated, and he was very clear, that the most important tool of freedom and sovereignty, including sovereignty of the imagination, is education. He was very clear on that. That education stands first in the pantheon of what the things that are required for freedom of a people who have passed through hell on earth for centuries, and who before that had a history that we don't even remember because it's not dealt with in our schools. And that's part of the legacy of the history of colonial education. So, the need, therefore, to use Garvey's thought in ways that teachers can understand and other persons, to make it a part of what we do in order to teach Garveyism in school. From 2013, there was a proclamation about teaching Garvey in school. And Dr. Blackwood Meeks can relate to that in very intimate ways. But if the teachers are not prepared, I have known teachers who argued that Garveyism should not be taught in school, and they have never read a word of Garvey. Never read a word of Garvey. They call him a thief, fraudster, and all sorts of things. And yet, the ideas of Garvey are the ideas about independence. How to become independent. And therefore, what we are seeking to do is to prepare materials for teachers to guide, but as well as to help them to go through Garvey's philosophies and his opinions of one of the most consequential philosophers of the 20th century, and whose work is highly relevant for our journey of becoming in the 21st century. And that is the reason for having this volume. Of course, we should also understand that Garvey, having said that education is number one in terms of the process of liberation and sovereignty, that in this process of education, the number one principle of this education is self-discovery. He was very clear on that. The number one principle of education is self-discovery. Because self-discovery shapes people's agency, shapes how people behave. And it's very important in this Caribbean space, and as we are seeing on the African continent, where people are not conscious of themselves, of their history, of their ancestry, they become confused. And they misbehave in ways that we don't or might not like. And therefore, one of the ways to deal with the problem of violence and rituals of indignities is to teach about the traditions that shape the struggle against slavery and colonialism, those traditions that have been bequeathed by our ancestors in battle. We have to teach our students these things as a way of becoming better, to know ourselves better. And therefore, an education that allows us to respect ourselves and to serve ourselves. We have had hundreds of years of serving other people who felt that we were not people. Some still do. Self-service, therefore, is an important goal of education. And certainly GARVEY's education is, its universal dimension is quite obvious when you read his work. It's very important, therefore, that we study GARVEY, and we study the tradition from which he came. We need to study that tradition. And in doing so, we begin to develop that type of culture intellectually that will help to shape us as a community of people in a way that is quite redemptive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. The reader can be a friend of the writer, but the reader can also be an academic who has been selected for his ability to bring that analysis and perspective to the work. Today, the team has chosen Professor Rupert Lewis to serve as reader at the launch of this book. Professor Lewis.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you, Professor Clinton Hutton, for your very succinct and clear philosophical statement on the significance of this book. Congratulations on the launch of the Mico Publishers. It's entirely fitting that it should be marked by the book Marcus Garvey, Pedagogy and the Power of Education, edited by Professor Clinton Hutton, Director of the Institute of the Technological and Educational Research, and Dr. Asburn Pinnock, President of the Mico University College. 2025 marks 100 years since the publication of Volume 2 of Philosophy and Opinions, which was combined with the first volume that was published in 1923. I regard this event, therefore, as a celebration of the book that is being launched today, as well as the centenary of Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey. The first Opinions was edited by Amy Jakes Garvey, who lived from 1896 to 1973. And the selections were approved by Garvey himself while he was imprisoned in Atlanta. She managed its publishing and distribution. Philosophy and Opinions has had a significant impact among African people in the continent and the diaspora. It shares with Frantz Fanon's Black Skin, White Mass, 1952, and Wretched of the Earth, 1961, an urgency and relevance that goes beyond the time when it was written. Philosophy and Opinions speaks to us about the contemporary realities. Welcome, Professor Shepard. Yes. Philosophy and Opinions speaks to us about the contemporary realities faced by global Africa and is a call to action. In 2021, Dr. Julius Garvey published a revised version of the Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey, Pedagogy and the Power of Education, is pushing us to seize the present moment, to rethink a pedagogy of decolonization. If we are not on an upward learning curve, all of us, regardless of age, in this era of technological change and shifting of global economic, political, and racial configuration, then we will be left behind. The world in which we live is changing, and our place in it as African people should agitate us to action, especially in the field of educational transformation. The essays in this volume are all interconnected, and they lead us directly to the importance and centrality of Garvey's work, which is much quoted, but little read and hardly studied. Professor Hutton, in his introduction, provides an important framework for a pedagogical revolution, away from racial pedagogies that sustained slavery, colonialism, and neocolonialism. Hutton argues, and I quote, Garvey's thought represented the development and continuation of a black philosophical and pedagogical tradition that emerged in the Caribbean and beyond during the struggle of black people against their enslavement, end quote. Quote continues, Garvey's monumental legacy to us remains largely on the outside of the mainstream education system, enmeshed in the pedagogy and philosophy of marginalization, obscurity, amnesia, suspicion, ridicule, erasure, and deletion. Positively, there are many people in this audience today who have taken it as their work to fight against these negative currents. Hutton goes on to argue, you do not necessarily need the presence of white people for white supremacy to work in the neocolonial interests of the departed colonial order. That persistent system of training and supervision which the European colonists held to be necessary to prevent subjected Africans from reverting to their natural state of barbarism and savagery is to an important degree being managed by the descendants of the formerly enslaved. Such is the power of mental enslavement culturally, institutionally, and socially when consistent, rigorous decolonial measures are not applied to our educational system and hence as a guide to nation building, unquote. So that because Jamaica is 98% black doesn't mean at all that Jamaicans have black consciousness. We do have black consciousness in groups at times in our history, but there's a constant struggle within us between the white supremacist aspect and the black assertiveness of our humanity. Hutton's concept of self-directed learning, he says, in its truest sense, is the agency of teaching and learning to a very important degree, which consciously and simultaneously resides and operates in the same person. That is the fostering and development of the capacity of a person for self-education. He goes on to say, this is perhaps the most important agential value in the making of the sovereign learner, and perhaps too the principal motivator in the pursuance of lifelong learning as a conscious human existential endeavor, and a value in its own right. The sovereign learner then is thus a person who developed the capacity and agency to teach him or herself to learn, aided or unaided. It does not mean that the sovereign learner is necessarily only self-instructed or is without instruction. Both are important to the development of the pedagogical agency of the person. So this concept of the sovereign learner is one of the main takeaways from this particular text. These ideas inform Dr. Ashburn's Pinnock essay on education and the development of a sovereign Jamaican civilization, which takes its inspiration from a quotation by Marcus Garvey. Dr. Pinnock argues that, and I quote Dr. Pinnock, history has proven that the European-inspired mechanisms have been largely irrelevant and deeply damaging to the framing of a culture of freedom, identity, sovereignty, citizenship, governance, and development of the Jamaican nation. What therefore is the solution How does a country whose national psyche has been so badgered and battered by an oppressive foreign imposed system rise like the proverbial phoenix from its ashes? Dr. Pinnock goes on to say, it is incumbent on us as an independent nation to develop a system of education to undo the ravages, the sociological, cultural, psychological, economic, and religious damage wrought by years of colonialism, and to promote a culture and agency of respect, dignity, civility, confidence, creativity, responsibility, and self-reliance. This will be the undergirding of the manifestation of true independence and freedom. In addition, Dr. Pinnock provides historical information on Miconians who shared the vision of black empowerment, from Alexander Dixon, who was elected to the Legislative Council in the 1890s, T.A. Aikman, who worked closely with Garvey in the 1930s, to Dudley Thompson, the outstanding Rhodes Scholar, Pan-Africanist, and reparation activist. We need in the Caribbean frank and honest discussions on how race operated and continues to function locally and globally. These are issues frequently swept under the carpet in our educational curricula. Ambassador Byron Blake's foreword poses the question, or the statement rather, and he says, it is strange but not altogether surprising that 63 years or three generations after independence, black Jamaican policymakers and educators need to be convinced of the importance of teaching Marcus Garvey's philosophy to a black Jamaican population, unquote. I had the privilege of reading the unpublished memoir of the late Daphne Abrahams, wife of the journalist and novelist Peter Abrahams. She was an English woman who was an artist and agreed to do illustrations for educational texts for the Ministry of Education in the first decade of independence. She used her children as models. They were brown children. No problem for the Ministry of Education. She, however, looked around in the rural community of Red Hills where she lived and thought that she would draw some of the beautiful black children she saw in the village. When she took the drawings to the civil servant, herself a black woman, Daphne Abrams was told they were too black. She should lighten them. She told the civil servant she was not prepared to do that. The mentality of that civil servant is still in Jamaica today. Dr. Maziki Thames' essay, Decolonizing Education, Race, Gender, and the Politics of Hair in Schools, argues that black liberation demands that black bodies are treated with dignity and respect, firstly by black people themselves, especially the black teacher and administrator. Therefore, education of people of African descent should address lingering doubts. I'm not sure that it's more than lingering, but it's still a good formulation to have. And that's a positive formulation if you say lingering, because I think it's more than lingering. But be that as it may, lingering doubts about the value of black people that was planted into the minds of Africans and African-descended people in the Caribbean in slavery, colonialism, and the educational system created therein. Let me take the privilege of mentioning here Professor Christopher Charles's forthcoming book on skin bleaching, in which he provides rich empirical data and psychological analyses of the complicated world of skin bleaching in Jamaica within a global comparative framework. The prevalence of skin bleaching in Jamaica is 10% as compared to parts of West Africa where it is 20% upwards. It is also, that is Christopher Child's book, forthcoming book, is a very important study of 21st century contradictory mentalities of Africans on the continent and in the diaspora that are rooted in multiple identities that bear the marks of the legacies of the transatlantic trade in Africans, colonialism, colorism, and hegemonic whiteness. The author also provides policy recommendations to deal with skin bleaching. Professor Vereen Shepherd's essay with the title, Too Dangerous, ? The revolutionary potential of mandatory history in the Caribbean demands change. She argues that, quote, the greatest weapon in the fight for the recovery of a people's identity of knowledge about themselves is history education, culturally relevant history education, mandatory history education in our schools and higher education institutions. After all, she says, the surest way to defeat the project of true emancipation is to ensure that impressionable children remain ignorant of their past and the legacy of activism around issues of justice and human rights for which our ancestors fought. There is a sense in which policymakers seem to see history as something out there, removed from us. And history really, what Professor Shepherd is talking about, is about us, it's about our lives. It's about our internal structures, memories, hopes, what the ancestors have done. So it's really, what we're doing in not centering history is negating our very selves and our traditions. Marcus Garvey asserted, the essay by Dr. Julius Garvey, entitled Garvey's Experience, The Power of Education, draws on his father's seminal essay, African Fundamentalism, really a critical document just of a few pages. Marcus Garvey asserted in that essay the following: God and nature first made us what we are, and then out of our own creative genius, we make ourselves what we want to be. Follow always that great law. Let the sky and God be our limit, and eternity our measurement. There is no height to which we cannot climb by using the active intelligence of our own minds. Being at present the scientifically weaker race, in your schools, in your homes, and everywhere possible, you must teach the higher development of science to your children and be sure to develop a race of scientists par excellence, unquote. Garvey was very certain about the centrality of science and technology in our future. If you don't have the power of science, the power of technology, you're going to be marginalized. The essay on Garvey's pedagogy, written by me, draws on his Jamaican writings. Really is embarrassing to be reviewing a book in which you have an essay. But this is what the reader is supposed to do. While the American writings on Garvey are available, the Jamaican writings are not as well known. I quote from an editorial in the Black Man newspaper published in Jamaica in 1929 for Garvey's perspective on education. And here he's discussing education in terms of labor market theory, although he doesn't use that term, uses a utilitarian function of education. And then he talks about that we can't limit ourselves to utility, because there are other values in education that we need to foster. And this is in the context where we don't have as many tertiary institutions as we now have. And people really, policymakers really wanted people to stop at elementary school. So he's talking now about how you move beyond that to higher levels of education. And this is his quotation. In one sense, he says, education is wholly utilitarian. We have adopted a definition of the term which seriously limits its broad and choice application, and which is, after all, no definition, but a mere statement of what we must regard as one of the main aims of education. We say education is that which fits us for complete living, altogether forgetting the leading out and the development of faculty. It is around this secondary or derived meaning of the term that has grown up the gross misconception that the education given to the child should be regulated by this child's status, or rather the status of its parents, by its environment, and by what the child is destined to be, the last of which no one can tell, nor has anyone the right to predetermine. The whole system is thus reversed, he says, and the child becomes the object of repressive forces from without, instead of developing by the formative elements from within, which means growth, progress, and expansion of life to include the enormous powers of the mind, which is capable, of which a mind is capable, and of which we at present do not know the limits, unquote. This repression results in the claim for vocational training. And then he goes on to say, vocational training is important, but we have to go beyond vocational training to a level of understanding of science and technology, and articulates a view which combines both the vocational along with the scientific. So that there is a template that GARVEY developed in the context of Jamaica and his vision of what that future could look like. And he concludes, generally along these lines we must proceed, and a national system of education will afford these islands, West Indian islands, the opportunity of organizing such a system. So that he was interested both in what obtains in Jamaica and what obtains in the region. The elements of this approach, as I said, recognize labor markets in his utilitarian approach, but he's looking at new possibilities in learning and affirms that these opportunities must not be restricted based on finance, money, background, gender, race, color. And he ends with his usual syncretic view of the harmony of body, mind, and spirit. And that combination is very important for us to have. Let me conclude this overview by saying that how do we in global Africa prepare for the radical changes in science and technology within a changing global order? Too frequently, policymakers in the Caribbean neglect our own knowledge traditions. The necessity of affirming ourselves, of building our confidence, of enhancing our capabilities in the face of multi-generational internalized racism, plus new waves of racism which terrorize our sense of self and seek to debate us. I'm all for STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEAM, as Dr. Pinnock is an advocate of, as a focal point of our educational system. But it must also embrace a range of subjects in the humanities, culture in its many dimensions, languages, music, film, art, creative writing, history, citizenship, governance, and entrepreneurship. This volume needs to be read by our policymakers. It also needs to be critically studied in our teacher training colleges. Good outcomes in educational transformation will enrich not only Jamaica or Caribbean region, but global Africa. Congratulations to the editors and on the launch of the publishing house. Thank you very much.
In thanking Professor for that comprehensive overview, I have to make a confession and give a testimony. The confession is that I leveraged the appointment as moderator to ask for the opportunity to read an advanced copy. And so even some of the concepts I've used in my remarks, some of the authors would recognize are from the book. But also, the testimony is that I was intensely engaged in the material. Dr. Pinnock, I might be taking a risk here. But as an institution, we have to join the individuals in the self-discovery, institutional discovery, to ensure that the focus is on the pedagogy of self-directed learning and not perpetuating in any way the pedagogy of humiliation, of desecration, and all the other negative terms that sometimes inadvertently comes out in our system. So it's a time for reflection for individually and as an institution. I join you, Professor, in extending welcome to Professor Shepherd. I confidently indicated that you were on your way, and we understand the circumstances. I would also like to recognize Principal of UWI, Mona, that is Professor Derek Williams. Denzel Williams, I'm so sorry. All right, Professor Denzel Williams. Welcome, sir. Happy to have you. The author's response will be given in 3 parts. First, we'll have Dr. Julius Garvey, who will present virtually. And then we'll kindly ask you, Professor Shepherd, to follow, and then Dr. Thames. So can we now have Dr. Garvey on the screen?
It is indeed a pleasure for me to be here with you this afternoon. I'd like to thank Dr. Ashburn Pinnock, president of the Mico University College, who, along with Professor Clinton Hutton, has launched this magnificent book, Marcus Garvey, Pedagogy and the Power of Education, and at the same time has launched the Mico Publishers. I think this is indicative of a new turn in the education of Jamaicans. And I think also the Caribbean people and maybe even further abroad. It's necessary. For the last 500 years, we've been subjected to physical slavery, imperialism, and colonialism. And this was a process of dehumanization, destruction of our culture, denial of our history, and miseducation that destroyed our African identity and replaced it with a caricature of a human being that white racism wanted us to be. It has produced mental afflictions of self-hate, self-doubt, distrust, dependency, inferiority, and the mindset that the European is the bearer of all wisdom and the arbiter of world destiny. Carter G. Woodson, in his book, Miseducation of the Negro, in 1933, said, "The educational system developed in Europe and the Americas and resultant philosophy and ethics justified slavery, peonage, segregation, and lynching. Due to the Negro being taught the same economics, history, philosophy, literature, and religion that has established that code of morals, his mind, that is the mind of the Negro, has been brought under the control of his oppressor. The problem of holding the Negro down is therefore easily solved. When you control a man's thinking, you do not have to tell him not to stand here or go yonder. He'll find his proper place and will stay in it. You don't need to send him to the back door. He will go without being told. In fact, if there's no back door, he'll cut one for a special benefit. His education makes it necessary. I would say his miseducation makes it necessary." Marcus Garvey in 1937, in a speech in Halifax, Nova Scotia, said, "We're going to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery because whilst others may free the body, none but ourselves can free the mind." We have apparently not understood this fully, but have accepted physical freedom as our destination and have absorbed a materialistic philosophy, scientific materialism, technological industrialization, and the capitalist economic system that Europe has developed and has gained great worldwide popularity. These ideas have exacerbated conflicts between people and brought the world to the brink of nuclear disaster while depleting the non-renewable resources of the planet. and we're now running out of resources to fuel the industrial economy. This has resulted in climate change and global warming. Clearly, what Europe has produced is a technological civilization, if one wants to call it a civilization, based on the values and philosophy of scientific materialism, individualism, greed, and imperialism. The current dominant capitalist world system generates international polarization, conflict, income inequality, widespread unemployment, marginalization, exploitation, and dependency. Modern education based on this scientific materialism has redefined knowledge based solely in terms of scientifically measured facts. We are therefore reduced to physical entities experiencing physical events and sensations, responding with rational intelligence based on feelings. And humanity, in its larger sense, becomes inherently meaningless. Matthew Arnold has said, civilization is the humanizing of man within society. Most European and American nations have not achieved that. Fortunately for us, the African experience has always been a search for and a practice of what it means to be fully human. Our history is the longest in the world and the most glorious, since it gave us both the origin of mankind and the basis of civilized living with the Nile Valley civilization, most eminent of which was Kemet. Marcus Garvey said that education is a particular civilization and their own advancement and glory. All African educational systems beginning in Kemet are rooted in the cosmic view of a divine creation with humans as an integral part of that manifestation as well as its highest expression. The purpose of education as a socialization process was the transformation of the human towards the full expression of his or her divine potential. With this philosophy and spirituality, we can recreate African humanism as the new paradigm for the 21st century and beyond. The battle is for the minds of our people. To create the paradigm of African humanism, we must have an educated populace. It is by education that we transmit our culture. And culture is the instrument by which we deal with reality, by which we adapt reality to ourselves. Thus, culture is an instrument of power because power is our ability to define reality. If we give up our culture and allow it to be replaced by somebody else's, then we have given up our power to control reality and have become the servants of somebody else. I think this is pretty much where we are. Marcus Garvey said, a people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. How then do we transmit our culture? Well, it is by education that we transmit our culture. We Africans have a spiritual culture, and when we repair our cultural breach, we will have liberated our minds from mental slavery, restored our self-esteem and self-confidence, and opened up the infinite resources of our creative intelligence. So the magnificent purpose of education then is to humanize and develop our species. As Marcus Garvey said, it is only through our spirituality and science that we can combat the naked materialism of the current age. So we have to create an educational system that's based squarely on the truth of Africa's agency in world history for the last 10,000 years. We cannot have sustainable economic and social development without maximizing our human resources. And we cannot afford the, shall we say, educational apartheid, as someone has said, that exists in Jamaica. If we do not change, we will self-destruct. Our human resource is our most valuable resource. So I'm glad and very pleased and happy to have been part of this book relative to the Marcus Garvey's pedagogy and education. And I hope that this really fuels, shall we say, a change in the direction of our educational process, because it's sorely needed for all of us as African people. And Jamaica is a great place for it to start. And Mico is an excellent place to begin with. So thank you so much for having me.
Greetings, everyone, for your introductions. Thank you to Prof. Clinton Hutton for having invited me to be a part of this fantastic book. You know, I have to pay respect to my late mother, Ruth Lynn Mighty, because she was my first history teacher. And my father had always said that the district in which we were living was called Hopewell, but everyone else called it Africa. So I asked my mother, maybe I was around 5 years old or so, why do people say I live in Africa? And she said, well, it's because we're poor. It's because the area is infrastructurally challenged. Those are my words. My mother never said infrastructurally challenged. Maybe she say pop down. So she said, more or less, it's because of the stereotypes about the continent of Africa. And that's how some people regard us. Anyway, so I'm out of Africa. I used education for upward social mobility, but history has always been my subject because it explains the present, it explains the present through the past, and it offers a roadmap, certainly, for what is my responsibility in life. And I have stuck to that, and I lobby, as Professor Lewis said, for compulsory history education. So my contribution to the volume, Too Dangerous, The Revolutionary Potential of Mandatory History Education in the Caribbean, takes inspiration not just from my mother, who later said, you know, you've become a rebel because of this history. But it takes inspiration from two questions that were posed by Professor Clinton Hutton at the outset of a virtual conference, Two Conversations on Marcus Garvey, The Power of Education and Education of the African Child. That was in October, Clinton, 2020, and hosted by the Institute of Technological and Educational Research, ITA, right here at Mico University College and the Marcus Garvey Institute. And the questions were, what is the philosophical and pedagogical responsibility and obligations of educational institutions like the Mico in dealing with the historical problematic of existence, freedom, justice, and development in the 21st century? The other question, how does Marcus Garvey, as well as the philosophical and pedagogical traditions that he was, or I would say still is a part of, challenge the fettering Colombian order today? I ask also, is the discipline of history too dangerous? Is it too hot to handle? Is it too potentially subversive? Is it too revolutionary in the way it is written by revisionist Caribbean scholars who have destabilized the colonial narrative since the 1950s? Is the answer to all these questions yes, thus affecting it becoming a mandatory discipline in our schools and universities? Indeed, I cannot help but think about the ways in which the revolutionaries, the historical figures like the Maroons deported to the inhospitable climate of Nova Scotia in Canada after the Second Maroon War of 1796 in Jamaica, Queen Cuba of Jamaica, who was exiled to Cuba but found her way back to the island, and the men and women deported after wars of resistance to chattel enslavement in 1760 and 1832, or the contemporary ones like Walter Rodney. Is it why they have been exiled or deported? Because they marched to a different drum? And I think of Jacob, Henry Dwyer, James King, Alexander Simpson, Henry Betts, Jones, Ludovic, West Valentine, all deported after wars of resistance in Jamaica in the 18th century. The importance of knowing and teaching about the past was articulated by Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who said, and you heard him, history is a landmark by which we are directed into the true course of life. He was not alone in stressing the importance of history education. The late great Tata Madiba, Nelson Mandela, expressed the view, and I quote, "It is always important to look at your history. You cannot really be proud of yourself if you do not know your history." And the late Professor Rex Nettleford insisted that one cannot drive without a rearview mirror. In addition, the Trinidadian American Maya Angelou, now an ancestor, has long said that the more you know of your history, the more liberated you are. Yet successive governments of the region have failed to ensure that Caribbean people are fully equipped with a knowledge of their past origin, culture, and civilization by making history a compulsory discipline in our schools. Indeed, history is not seen as fundamental or foundational, and many in the society even regard it as an irrelevant subject. Opponents hold to their view, despite the opposite view, that history has an active cultural and political role because of its relationship to national and regional identity. I argue oppositely, and you heard Prof. quote from that chapter, that the greatest weapon in the fight for the recovery of a people's identity, of knowledge about themselves, is history education, culturally relevant history education, mandatory history education in our schools and higher education institutions. The surest way to defeat the project of true emancipation is to ensure that impressionable children remain ignorant of their past and the legacy of activism around issues of justice and human rights for which our ancestors fought. I cannot help thinking that the revolutionary nature of our history, because Caribbean people have always had to struggle against unjust regimes and legal systems, creates fear in the corridors of power holders in Caribbean societies. What else could be preventing the governments of the region from ensuring that history becomes a mandatory subject at all levels of the education system? I'm not saying you have to do it in an exam. I'm saying you just have to teach it and learn it as a foundation subject. On the contrary, students in secondary schools at an age when they can develop a true appreciation for history are not made to do history. It is a choice they make, or their parents make that choice, or their teachers make the choice for them. So what is the situation when history is a choice, as it is now? These issues are the critical ones I raise in my article, but we here in this room, if you believe in what I'm saying, the project that I support, we here need to move from lobbying through writing to lobbying through advocacy so that we help to right the wrongs of the past. Thank you.
Good afternoon, all. I have to say that I'm pleased to be one of the contributors to this volume. Thank you very much, Clinton, for inviting me to participate with the other even more distinguished scholars. I also have to say that I wasn't sure what it meant to give an author's reply when Clinton asked me to do it, and he said, you know, just say something. So this is my something in, in relation to my reading of the text, at least what I could read in the short period of the quote-unquote advanced copy. You know, it strikes me that we are also launching micro-publishing, or publishers, sorry. I think that decisions like those and the decision for the first publication to be a publication on GARVEY is, a political one, or are political ones, that relate to the approach that we take to national education, and that requires intervening in power dynamics based in a history where people of African descent have been demeaned, commodified, and exploited. Unfortunately, we have learned to produce similar power dynamics in our present. In the foreword to the book, Byron Blake tells us that, quote, many black Mico-educated headmasters and classroom teachers not only taught foolishness, but administered capital punishment with the officially provided canes and leather straps and whips they made from certain reeds, vines, and branches. It is only in recent history that capital punishment was outlawed, and in some places in Jamaica, it is still practiced. When my daughter was in grade 1, she's now in 5th form, I complained to the principal of beatings in her classroom. When the principal reminded the teacher that this was against the law, she replied that she would do it anyway because the children were rude. I want us to go beyond the thinking that colonial education has imparted upon us that says our children and our people are deserving of wicked violence. Education must disrupt such uses of power and create possibilities that contest the colonial project which originated formal education in the Caribbean. Our approach to national education must therefore be decolonizing, which means struggling with our past and its legacies in the present. What better place to start thinking through the problems of colonial education than with GARVEY, and as Prof. Shepherd has argued in her chapter, through mandating history education. Houghton begins his chapter with a most relevant GARVEY quote. It will be philosophy that will save this perishing race of ours. I agree. We need philosophy so we can understand ourselves, imagine and create a different world than that which exists today. We need deep reflection on all aspects of our world, and to get there, it is imperative to engender a love of reading in our society, of quiet and slowness, of reasoning and storytelling of the ancient African griots. Blake also reminds us in his foreword that GARVEY benefited from informal education, including of folk wisdom. There was a time when we could rely on a popular education system, such as that produced within our music, to hear stories of an alternative vision for the nation. They told stories of our responsibilities to each other, and they challenged the social order. We could say that they have died, those stories, at the altar of accumulation and the idea of the market as king. In his chapter, Rupert Lewis reminds us of GARVEY's position that education policy should not be exclusively based on labor market needs. Education must transcend the market. Like Garvey, I prefer to think of education in liberatory terms, where history is our ultimate teacher and decolonization is our imperative. To be clear, when I say decolonization, I am referencing the way this book that we are celebrating is thinking about ways to humanize people of African descent. I am referencing a project of affirming and bringing dignity to ourselves in relation to creating a world of mutual well-being, and it is possible. In that vein, I want to end with some thoughts from Impressions of Liberty Hall, the multimedia Marcus Garvey Museum at 76 King Street. In the guest book that I looked at some years ago, these are a few of the quotations that were written there. Tamika Johnson wrote, "I believe I need to relearn my history. Today provided me with self-purpose." Latoya Rattray wrote, "Wish I were exposed to Garveyism at an early age. I would be greater than I am now." M. Neal wrote, "Very inspirational. Good reminder of being Black, proud and beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the responses. Dr. Thames, I was kind of waiting to hear you emphasize that regulation of female student dress and not teaching how to control the male gaze. It's in the book. All right. So I tell you, this is just a taste of the concepts that have been developed in the book. And as one who was intensely engaged in that, I just encourage you and ask you to also engage in the reading of that book. At this point, there will be some presentation of copies of the book. And I'll invite, first of all, Professor Clinton Hutton to join me here. Yes? All right. And he will be making presentations. That's on this side, yes? Good. All right, so we invite Professor Lewis, Rupert Lewis. Was in the photo. All right. Thank you. Professor Shepherd. Thank you. Dr. Thiem. We invite Ms. Dorothy White, Marcus Garvey School Foundation representing Major White. Invite Professor Errol Miller. Copy, sir. And we have to also, we can't help but boasting that he's one of our outstanding principals of the Mico College.
I have to say something. I'm really glad that Professor Miller is here with us this afternoon on this momentous occasion. Professor Miller was my principal when I was a student at Mico. He was in his second year, and I was in my first year, so I am his grub. Right? But I need to say that Professor Miller's impact on me is one of the main reasons why I'm here today. That thing that we call principal hours, man, this man. I'm really glad he's here today. Prof.
There are many reasons I'm here today, but I'll tell you the principal. Sometimes when you're the principal, you get recommendations about students and what to do with them. And I was at one time petitioned by certain members of staff that there's this youngster named Clinton Hutton that had no place being a teacher and should be expelled. So I tried to look to what it was. And the thing that was most offensive to some people was his art. blood. And I couldn't talk against the people making the point because clearly there was an angry young man. And I thought, and I couldn't talk to him about any of this. So the only way I thought I could recognize somebody with great talent and a great mind was to start to buy his paintings. I don't have any of those because they were watercolors. And, you know, watercolor, well, but if you go to my house now, you will find paintings of Clinton. I could not come this evening. Thank you.
I invite Ambassador Blake, who did the foreword in the book. All right. Also invite Dr. K. Dunkley, copy editor, for your copy of the book. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. Can get back to the camera. All right. I now invite co-editor Dr. Asburn Pinnock to step forward to do some presentations of books. I begin with Ms. Winsome Hudson from the National Library, or the representative, if Ms. Hudson. Oh, okay, yes, all right, okay. Ms. Audrey Sadler, Deputy Librarian, University of West Indies, Mona. Dr. Eduardo Ali, Pro Registrar of the CXC. And that's a marketing push, Dr. Ali. Invite Ms. Melanie Leach, University College Librarian, the Mico University College. And we have a board that is fully supportive of the research and publication thrust. Two representatives here. First of all, Ms. Maria Jones, will you receive your copy? Director, Chair of HR Committee of the Board of Directors. And Dr. Pansy Hamilton, long-standing member of our Board of Directors and supporter of the advancement of the institution. Thank you very much, Dr. Pinnock. Ladies and gentlemen, in a little while we'll have the vote of thanks from Dr. Dunkley, but these editors and writers make very good signatures. And those signatures sometimes might be very valuable in the future. And so there'll be book signing in the adjoining room, and of course there will be the book sale. So Dr. Dunkley will say the thank you at this time, and then we will get into that mode of purchasing, signing, and generally socializing.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have had a lot to consider. We have met the work, and I tell you that book is one of the pieces that will go down as being the forerunner. Why? Because it pulls a whole lot that we would find all over the place into one space, not only about Marcus Garvey, but about his legacy. And as Professor Shepard said, history is not only about the past, it actually directs us into the future. Members of the board of the Mico University College, and I'm not going to try and repeat everybody's name, the president and author, our vice president, academics. I'm going to leave Mr. Sewell out of this one for now. To our colleagues, our specially invited guests, for example, Dr. Ali, thank you. To Professor Emeritus, Professor Errol Miller and Mrs. Miller, thank you. To our authors, we would not have this work without you. Our other specially invited guests, including the members of the library, and I want to say network, Dorothy White, representative of the Marcus Garvey Schools Foundation, UNIA represented by Stephen Goulding, Mark Smith, JTA president, and other specially invited guests who remain in this room because we believe in what we have met today. On behalf of the Mico publishers and ITA, I extend a heartfelt thanks for joining us today. A special thanks to Professor Clinton Hutton because this was his baby. And although it was coming out of Professor Jones, he made it happen. It took a while, and I'm going to say it took a while because you hear him mention 2020. But it was not about speed. It was about the quality of the work, and he stood steadfast in that journey. He also made the Mico publishers a reality, and for that we say thank you. To our authors, who are our superstars, we say thank you again for joining this vision, for coming on the journey, because Professor Clinton Hutton did not do it alone. History, its teaching, and now Marcus Garvey, pedagogy and the power of education. They stand together. Mrs. Alvarenga, we would not be here without you. We would not be at this event without you. And this is her hard work. This is her call. These are her many late nights. We say a special thank you to Ms. Blair, her diligence, her patience, and her oversight, because sometimes she focused on the details, and we say thank you. I would be failing in my duties if I did not say to Mr. Sewell, thank you for your expert moderation, sir. You are now a part of the INAFCA Museum. Welcome to the INAFCA Museum, the INAFCA at the Mico. And we welcome you to this space. It is available. And for those persons who want to see our collection, please send an email to Kerry and Perry at themico.university. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we do have our hospitality team waiting, and it is led by our lecturer and head of department, Jody Brown. They are next door. Finally, thank you everyone for being here, for making this momentous occasion memorable. The Mico Publishers has begun. And we look forward to truly educating our people about ourselves. Thank you again.
Ladies and gentlemen, we shall now repair to the museum seminar room, and we'll wish you all a pleasant afternoon.